I was a soldier. I survived 3 campaigns. I counted the days until I could go home. Now I am sitting in a trench with my lungs full of green, and I can feel them growing. Tiny movements, like fingers unfurling inside my chest. What does it mean to die for the Emperor when your body becomes a nursery for his enemies? Let me start at the beginning. Not because the beginning matters anymore, but because I was trained to document, and the habit is stronger than the dying. The Departamento Munitorum trained me well. Record everything. Data is the lifeblood of the Imperial war machine. I have been recording things for 11 years. I will record this too until I cannot. My name is Lucas Vaughn. I hold the rank of Senior Guardsman, 3rd Company, 81st Armetian Infantry. My serial number is stamped on the inside of my collar. I mention this not because I believe anyone will come looking for me, but because a man should state his name while he still remembers it. I am not sure how long that will last. I am not sure of many things now. But I was sure of everything once. That is the thing I want to explain first. Before the air changed and the taste came and the green entered me, I was a man who was sure of things. That certainty was my entire life. I want you to understand what it felt like, before I explain what it feels like to lose it. I was not a hero. I had no illusions about that. Heroes are for the propaganda reels that play in the assembly halls on feast days. Men with square jaws and burning eyes who die shouting the Emperor's name. I am not that man. I am the man beside that man, the one with the chapped hands and the poorly fitted boots. The one who checks his equipment twice before a drop because he knows the quartermasters are understaffed and overworked and occasionally drunk. I am the man who survives not through valor, but through attention. Attention to cover, to supply lines to the wind direction, to the sound of shells. 3 campaigns, 11 years. I survived because I paid attention to everything. The photograph in my breast pocket is of a woman whose face I can no longer reconstruct in memory. I know it is a woman because the shape is there, the suggestion of features, but the specifics have dissolved over the years the way ink dissolves in water. She may have been someone I loved. She may have been someone who loved me. I kept the photograph because I read once that soldiers who have something personal on their person fight better, live longer, hold together under pressure. I kept it as a tool. That is the kind of man I am. Practical, clinical, unsentimental mostly. I want you to know this before I tell you about the sentimentality that came at the end, the strange tenderness I felt toward the growing thing inside me. You need the before to understand the after. The world we were defending had a designation I cannot recall, and a local name that translated roughly to the place where the stone meets the sky. It was a mining operation world, rock and dust, and industrial scaffolding that stretched from the canyon floors up into the pale gray atmosphere. The Orks had been here for 3 months before we arrived. I had seen Ork worlds before. The spores come first, always. Before the warg, before the ships, before the boots on the ground, the spores arrive. They drift in on solar winds, on the wake of their vessels, on the carcasses of dead Ork fighters jettisoned during transit. They seed a world the way a farmer seeds a field, patiently, without consciousness, driven by the most fundamental biological imperative: grow. When we landed, the world already smelled like them, something organic under the mineral dust, something alive and green and wrong. I noticed the smell on the first day and logged it. Atmospheric contamination, probable Ork Spore dispersal, advise continued use of rebreathers in open environments. The recommendation went up through channels, the way all recommendations go through channels, which is to say it went nowhere. We were fighting a war. There was no time to worry about air quality. Our rebreathers were functioning and the filters were within acceptable degradation parameters, and that was the end of the conversation. I wore mine. I always wore mine. I was the kind of man who followed the protocols because I understood that protocols existed for a reason, and I had seen enough men die from preventable causes to take no chances with the preventable things. My rebreather was functioning on the day the air changed. I want to be clear about that. I checked it at 0400, standard pre-engagement protocol. The filter was at 63% capacity, which was above the recommended replacement threshold of 50%. The seal was intact. The intake valve was unobstructed. Green lights across the board. I breathed through it for 3 hours of fighting and felt nothing unusual. Nothing. Green lights. Clean air. And then, somewhere between the 4th and 5th volleys, between the reload and the resight, I noticed a taste. Metallic first. That is common. Gunfire produces metallic taste, particulate discharge from lasguns, smoke residue, the chemical byproducts of 1,000 weapons firing in proximity. I have tasted metal in every engagement I have ever fought. I filed it and moved on. But then the taste changed. It became sweet, not pleasantly sweet. The sweetness of something organic, something wet, something that had been living and was now in the process of not living. And then it changed again, into something I had no prior reference for, something that was less a taste than a sensation, a presence, as though the air itself had acquired, a texture, and that texture was trying to communicate something to the inside of my throat. I coughed, a single cough, small, reflexive, the kind of cough that means nothing. I noted it and moved on. I fired 3 more times at a cluster of orcs crossing the open ground to our east, and I think I hit 2 of them, though in the chaos of the trench line it was impossible to be certain. I reloaded. I fired. I breathed. I coughed again. The second cough was different, not larger, not more violent, but somehow more intentional, as though my body was trying to accomplish something rather than simply reacting. I paused. This is the thing about attention, the thing I was trained toward. You do not ignore the second instance of a thing. The first can be noise. The second is a pattern beginning to form. I put my hand to the filter housing of my rebreather and felt it, functioning, warm from use, vibrating slightly with the action of the intake fan. Functioning. I looked at the readout. Green. I looked at the timestamp, 0731. I noted it in my log. Small cough. Repeated. Rebreather nominal. Will monitor. I told myself it was dust. Dust gets everywhere on a world like that. It works into the seams of your equipment, into the corners of your eyes, into the back of your throat despite the rebreather. Because no seal is perfect and no filter catches everything. I told myself it was the smoke from a burning HAB unit 400 meters to our north. Thick black smoke with a chemical smell that had been rolling over the trench line for the better part of an hour. I told myself it was the normal debris of a dying world. I was good at telling myself things. But I knew. I want to be precise about this. I did not suspect. I did not fear. I knew, in the way that the body knows things before the conscious mind has caught up, in the way that the hairs rise on your arms before you have conscious. Lie identified the sound that frightened you. Something was wrong in a way that had nothing to do with dust or smoke. I could feel it. Not pain, not discomfort. Exactly. Something more subtle. A sense of interiority, of interior attention, as though something in the cavity of my chest had become aware of itself and was quietly and methodically beginning to rearrange things. I filed it. I moved on. I survived 3 campaigns by moving on. By the second hour, the cough had become regular. I counted 11 coughs in 60 minutes. Not violent coughs, not the deep wrenching kind that leave you gasping and afraid, but consistent, patient, like a knock at a door, like something requesting entry or announcing its presence. I was tracking my respiratory rate by then, 22 breaths per minute, elevated above my resting rate of 14, but not at the critical threshold of 25. I noted it. I noted the persistent sweetness in the back of my throat, which had intensified in a way that no amount of swallowing could address. I noted that my chest felt not painful, but occupied. That is the only word I have for it. Occupied. As though something had moved into a space that had previously been empty and was now quietly taking stock of its new surroundings. My squad mate, a man named Holt, who had been with the regiment since Krelin's Pass, and who I privately considered the finest last gunner in the company, noticed me coughing at some point in the second hour. He asked if I was all right. I told him yes. He looked at me for a moment longer than necessary, the way veterans look at each other when they are trying to determine whether someone is telling the truth or protecting the line. Then he nodded and turned back to the parapet. He did not ask again. There was too much else to attend to. I was grateful for that, not because I was afraid of what he might do if he knew, but because I was not ready to say the thing out loud. Saying it out loud would make it real in a different way than writing it made it real. Writing was my domain. Words on a page was something I controlled. Speaking was surrender to another person's interpretation, and I was not ready for that. I was still compiling. I was still in the early stages of analysis. I needed more data. By the third hour, I had more data than I wanted. Respiratory rate had climbed to 26, above critical threshold. I noted this without emotion. Oxygen saturation I was estimating by the color in my fingernails and the slight grayishness I could see at the edges of my vision when I moved quickly. Because we had no monitoring equipment in the trench that wasn't dedicated to the lasguns and the voxcasters, I estimated saturation at 88%. Normal is above 95. I noted the gap. I noted the cough frequency, now 19 per hour. I noted something I had been hesitant to note, something I had been telling myself was a trick of the light or the poor ventilation in the trench, the color of what I was coughing up. Green, not the yellow-green of infection, not the gray-green of smoke exposure. Green, the specific saturated green of something alive, of chlorophyll, of growth. I sat with that for a moment. I held the cloth I had coughed into, and I looked at it, and I sat with what I was looking at. A guardsman who has served 11 years in the Imperial Guard accumulates a great deal of knowledge about the things that can kill him. We learn this knowledge informally, through barracks conversation and the grim anecdotes of veterans, and the occasional briefing from Medicae officers, who speak in the careful, modulated tones of people accustomed to delivering bad news. I had accumulated a great deal of knowledge about Ork Spores specifically, because Ork Spores are a particular kind of threat, the kind that does not announce itself with the sound of guns or the heat of a flamer. They are patient. They are biological. They are, in their own terrible way, almost elegant. Ork spores can survive in almost any environment. They can drift for decades in hard vacuum. They can withstand temperature extremes that would destroy almost any other biological material. When they find a suitable environment, something warm, something moist, something with available organic matter, they germinate. They do not require soil in the conventional sense. They require only the raw material of life, and the human body contains an abundance of raw material. The lungs, specifically, warm, moist, rich with the oxygen that accelerates their growth, lined with the soft tissue that their hyphae can penetrate and use as scaffolding. The lung is, from an Ork Spore's perspective, an ideal growing environment. This is not a secret. Every guardsman who has served on an Ork-contested world knows this. We know it the way we know all the things that can kill us, as background radiation, as data, as something that happens to other people in other places. I sat in my trench, with a cloth full of green sputum, and I understood that it was happening to me. I was not other people in other places. I was myself in this place, and the spores were in my lungs. I want to describe the mental process of that realization, because it was not what I would have predicted. I had always assumed, in the abstract way that soldiers assume things about their potential deaths, that learning of my imminent end would produce fear. Sharp, electric, the kind of fear that makes your hands shake and your vision narrow. That is not what happened. What happened was quieter, more methodical, as though my mind, trained through years to treat data as data and not as catastrophe, simply accepted the new information and began to reorganize around it. I was infected. The infection was Ork spores. The spores were growing. The outcome was not survivable without immediate Medicae intervention. and Medicae intervention was not available. These were the facts. I accepted the facts. I began to work within them. I put the cloth away. I took out my log. I wrote, Spore Choke, confirmed probable. Time of first symptom 0731. Current time 0912. Duration of exposure 1 hour, 41 minutes. Symptoms consistent with early-stage pulmonary infestation. Recommend I be removed from the line and transported to Medicae. I looked at what I had written. I looked at the battle raging around me. 200 meters of trench line held by 43 Guardsmen against an Ork advance that intelligence had estimated at 400, but was almost certainly more. I put my log away. I picked up my lasgun. I did not recommend anything to anyone. This is the thing about soldiers. We are trained to complete the mission, not because we do not value our own lives, but because we understand, at some level that transcends the personal, that the mission is larger than any individual life, and that the line must hold because, if the line does not hold, then the things behind the line, the people, the infrastructure, the other lines further back will also fall. I was infected. I was dying in a new and particularly terrible way. The line still needed to hold. These two facts existed simultaneously and did not cancel each other out. I held the line. I documented my own dissolution. I did both things at once. That is what a guardsman does. The movements began in the 4th hour. I do not have a clinical term for what I felt. I have tried to describe it accurately in these notes, and I am not certain I have succeeded. The closest I can come is this. Imagine the expansion of your chest during a very deep breath, the feeling of yi. Our ribs spreading, your diaphragm dropping, the pleural cavity filling with air. Now imagine that sensation occurring not in response to breath but spontaneously, and not as a single unified expansion, but as a series of small local movements. Specific points of pressure against the inner surface of my lungs, not pain. Pressure, like something pressing outward from within, like something that had been curled against the wall of my lung and was now, tentatively, experimentally, beginning to uncurl. I noted the time, 0947. I noted the character of the sensation, bilateral, affecting both lungs, more pronounced in the lower lobes. I noted my respiratory rate, 29. Above critical threshold now, firmly. I noted that the cough had changed in character from dry and reflexive to wet and productive. I noted the increased volume of green material produced with each cough. I was aware, as I noted these things, that I was describing my own transformation with the same detachment with which I might describe a piece of malfunctioning equipment. I found this appropriate. I found it, in a way I could not fully articulate even then, comforting. As long as I was taking notes, I was still myself. I was still the man who took notes. The notes were evidence that there was still a man here to take them. Holt was hit at around 10:15, a slug round, old Ork technology, but reliable enough at close range. It caught him in the shoulder and spun him backward, and he landed against the rear wall of the trench with a sound I will not try to describe. I moved to him automatically, because this is what you do, because the training is deeper than the illness, because some things persist even when everything else is dissolving. I applied a field dressing to his shoulder. My hands were shaking slightly. I noted this. Fine motor tremor, bilateral, onset 10:17, possibly neurological, possibly respiratory. Attitory-related hypoxia, possibly emotional response suppressed through the upper functions, finally expressing through the peripheral nervous system. I put the dressing on, and I pressed it, and I told Holt to keep pressure on it, and he looked at me with the particular expression of a man who is in severe pain and trying not to show it. And then he looked at me more carefully, and his expression changed. He said nothing. I said nothing. I picked up my lasgun and moved back to my position. The expression on his face stayed with me. It was the expression of someone who has looked at a person and seen that something has changed in them, something fundamental, something that cannot be changed back. I wondered what he saw. I wondered if the green was already in my eyes, in the particular quality of my gaze. I made a note to consider this. I noted that I felt a strange affection for him in that moment, not the normal brotherhood of soldiers. Something more specific, more tender, as though I was looking at him from a great distance already. By 1100, the movements had intensified to the point where they were affecting my breathing directly. Each time one of the internal pressures occurred, my intake of breath was disrupted, shortened, the smooth cycle of respiration interrupted by the thing inside me doing whatever the thing inside me was doing. I had read, in a briefing document distributed after the Golmers campaign, that Ork spores in the early stages of pulmonary infestation grow hyphae, fine thread-like structures that anchor the germinating spore to the host tissue and allow it to extract nutrients. The document had described this as painless in the initial stages. The document had been correct. It was not pain, but it was profoundly, unmistakably present. The hyphae, if that is what they were weaving themselves into my lung tissue with the patience of living things, DAN, that have no concept of hurry because they are operating on biological time, which is longer and slower and more certain than human time. I tried to think of them as threads in a loom. I tried to find a framework that made them something I could be neutral about. This was moderately successful. I am a man who has always been more comfortable with mechanical metaphors than biological ones, but the mechanical metaphor held up for a time. Threads in a loom, a structure being built. The material being used happened to be my lung tissue, but this was simply a fact of material science, of availability, of the biological opportunism that drives all living things toward growth. I fired my lascan at a cluster of orcs moving along the ridge to our southeast. I hit one. I reloaded. I coughed. I noted the time. I continued. The wait began in the early afternoon. I know the approximate time because I had been noting my symptoms with reasonable regularity, and the progression is clear in the log. By 13:30, I was recording what I can only describe as heaviness. Not the localized pressure of the earlier movements, but a generalized heaviness in both lungs, as though they had taken on mass, as though the structures being built inside them had reached a size and complexity where they were exerting gravitational presence. A lung is not heavy in normal function. You do not feel your lungs as weight. They float in the pleural cavity, buoyed by the same pressure differential that keeps them inflated. When you become aware of your lungs as weight, something has changed in their nature. Something has been added to them. I was aware of my lungs as weight. My cough by this point was producing what I can only describe as substantial material. I do not wish to be too detailed about this. I will say only that the green was deepening in color and that the material had a texture and a solidity that T had not had in the morning, and that this was consistent with the progression from spore germination through early hyphal development into what the briefing documents called the consolidation phase, in which the growing structures begin to occupy meaningful volume within the host tissue. My lungs were being consolidated. The territory was being claimed. I noted all of this. My handwriting was becoming less steady. I noted this too. Respiratory rate, 33. I noted this without commentary. Numbers speak for themselves. The Orks reached the first line of the trench network at 1412. I know this because the Voxcaster 2 positions to my left erupted into urgent traffic, and the sound of close-range combat changed in character from the distant thunder of an engagement happening to other people to the immediate, intimate noise of an engagement happening to me. I heard Guardsman firing on full auto. I heard the particular sound that orc blades make when they connect with something that was once a person. I heard shouting in at least 2 languages, and possibly 3. I rose to firing position and engaged. I want to describe this clearly because I think it is important. I was not afraid of the orcs. This surprised me, but it should not have. I was not afraid of the orcs because the orcs were an external thing, a thing outside my body, a thing that could shoot me or cut me or crush me and produce a form of death that would be, compared to what was already happening inside me, almost simple, almost clean, An orc blade through the chest would collapse a lung, and I thought, with a kind of clinical dark humor, that collapsing the lung at this point might be doing the spores a favor, concentrating them, giving them less room to work with. This thought was not helpful. I filed it and moved on. I fired. I hit things. I cannot tell you how many. My vision was beginning to narrow at the edges in a way that suggested my oxygen saturation had dropped further. Below 85, I estimated. Below 85% saturation, you begin to experience changes in cognitive function, in visual processing, in the precision of motor control. I was experiencing all three. My lasgun felt heavier than I remembered. The targets at the far end of my field of vision were harder to resolve. The calculations that a soldier makes automatically, range, movement prediction, trigger timing, were taking longer than they should have. I compensated by targeting closer. I compensated by firing more. I compensated by accepting that I was not operating at full capacity and adjusting my expectations accordingly. This is what training does. It builds procedures that function even when the person executing them is failing. The orc came into my section of the trench at 14:38. I know this because it was the last timestamp I managed to enter cleanly. After that, the handwriting in my log becomes unreliable enough that I cannot be certain of the times, only the sequence. It came over the parapet. They always come over the parapet. I have seen orcs come over parapets in 3 campaigns, and they always move the same way, with a kind of massive, unhurried confidence, as though the concept of cover does not apply to them because they have decided that being shot is not a meaningful deterrent. This one was larger than average. Green-gray skin over a frame that was more like geology than anatomy, more like a rock formation than a body. Its eyes were yellow, not the yellow of illness, but the yellow of something that has never been ill, something that has no category for illness because its biology does not permit it. It looked at me. I raised my lasgun. I fired twice. Both shots hit. I know they hit because I saw the burns form on its chest, which is what even a large orc will do when a lasgun bolt delivers its energy into the mass of them. It stopped. It looked at me. And then it continued. Not running. Walking. The way you walk toward something you are not afraid of, something you have already decided the outcome with, and you are simply completing a motion you began sometime earlier. I fired again and again. I do not know if the shots hit. My arm was shaking with something that was either the tremor I had noted earlier, or the effort of holding a lasgun at shoulder height when your lungs are being slowly repurposed by an alien biology, and your oxygen is below the threshold for reliable. Muscular coordination. The orc reached the edge of my position. It raised its weapon. A blade, an enormous blade, the kind that requires a creature of orcish mass to swing with anything resembling control. And I thought, this is it. This is the moment. Clean death. External. Simple. It stopped. I have thought about this many times since. The moment when it stopped. It stood over me with the blade raised, and it looked at me with those yellow eyes, and it did not bring the blade down. It waited. I do not have an explanation for this that satisfies me fully. Orcs are not subtle creatures in most respects, but there are accounts, documented in briefing materials I have read over the years, of orcs demonstrating the form of biological awareness, an ability to detect the spores within a potential host, perhaps through olfactory cues or some form of vibrational sensing we do not yet understand. There are accounts of orcs sparing individuals who were already infested, not out of mercy, because mercy is not a concept that maps cleanly onto orc cognition, but out of something more fundamental. Recognition, perhaps. The acknowledgement of a process already underway. A farmer does not cut down a field he has already planted. I looked up at it. It looked down at me. The blade stayed raised. The battle continued around us, a chaos of sound and fire and death, and in the small circle of our encounter, there was a terrible stillness. I understood something in that stillness. Not intellectually. The understanding was deeper than thought, more physical, more immediate. I understood that I was no longer only a soldier. I was already becoming something else. The Ork recognized what I was becoming. It was waiting for the process to complete. I lowered my lasgun. I cannot tell you why, except that the gesture was accurate. There was nothing more to defend with it. The enemy was inside me. The enemy had been inside me since 0731. The gun was a tool for fighting external enemies, and I had no external enemies anymore, not in the way that mattered. The Ork looked at the lowered weapon. Then it turned and moved away, back into the chaos of the trench battle, looking for something that still needed killing. I was not that thing. I sat down. I put my back against the trench wall. I took out my log. I want to record something I have not yet recorded, something that does not fit cleanly into the clinical framework I have been using throughout this document. I want to record what it felt like to sit against that trench wall with a lowered lasgun and watch an Ork walk away from me. Not the physical sensations, not the symptom progressions, but the interior experience of that moment, the thing happening in the part of me that is not yet fully claimed by the green. It felt like being recognized, not by the Ork. The Ork did not recognize me as a person. It recognized the process inside me the way it might recognize a particular quality of soil, a particular condition of ground. But something in that recognition, even that inhuman, biological recognition, produced in me a sensation I had not felt in 11 years of service. I had spent 11 years being a serial number, a body occupying a position, a functional unit within a larger machine. The Departamento Munitorum does not recognize guardsmen. It processes them. I had been processed for 11 years, deployed and resupplied and reassigned and processed, and the Ork who stood over me with its blade raised had looked at me and seen something worth waiting for, something worth not destroying, and this was, in its terrible way, the most personal attention anyone or anything had paid me in more than a decade. I sat with that for a while. The battle continued without me. I am writing this in the dark, or what feels like the dark. Whether my eyes are failing or the light is genuinely fading, I cannot determine with certainty. It is approximately 1700 by my best estimate. The sounds of battle have moved away from my position, which suggests either that we held the line further down and the Orks redirected, or that we did not hold the line and the Orks redirected because there was nothing left to fight. I do not know which. I find that I do not care with the urgency I would have cared this morning. Priority of attention has shifted inward. The weight in my chest is substantial now. Both lungs. I breathe in shallow cycles because deep breathing is no longer comfortable, no longer practical, the space available to air having been reduced by the structures that have colonized it. I estimate my oxygen saturation at 75% or below. At this level, cognitive function is meaningfully impaired. I am aware that my thinking is slower than it was this morning. I am aware that I am choosing words with less precision than I would prefer. I am doing my best. The documentation instinct persists even when the documenter is compromised. The movements are continuous now. They are no longer the tentative, exploratory pressures of early germ ination. They are the confident movements of an established colony conducting its business. I can feel them in a way that is difficult to convey without sounding like something other than the practical, clinical man I am and have always been. But I will try. They feel purposeful. Each movement has the quality of intention. Not my intention. The intention of the colony. The intention of the green. When I breathe in, I can feel them responding to the influx of air, orienting toward it the way plants orient toward light. I am providing something essential to the thing inside me. I am its atmosphere, its weather, its season. There is a particular quality to the movements in my lower left lobe that has been constant for the last 2 hours. A rhythmic pressure, subtle but insistent, like a pulse that is not my pulse. For a long time I tried to count it, to establish its frequency, to map it against my own heartbeat, and determine whether the two were related or independent. I could not establish a clean count. The rhythm is not perfectly regular. It fluctuates. It responds to things I cannot identify. Sometimes when I cough, the pressure in that lobe changes quality, becomes firmer for a moment, as though the colony there is reorienting itself after the disturbance, as though it is aware of the cough the way a plant is aware of wind, not intelligently, not consciously, but responsively. The colony responds to me. It is learning the rhythms of its environment. I am the environment. I keep returning to this fact. I turn it over in my mind the way I turn over all significant data, looking for what it means, looking for its implications, looking for what it tells me about my situation that I have not yet understood. I am the environment. The colony does not know I exist as a person. It knows only the conditions of the space it occupies: temperature, humidity, oxygen availability, the mechanical patterns of breathing and heartbeat, the chemical gradients of tissue and blood. These conditions define me from the colony's perspective completely. I am my conditions. I am the soil and the climate and the available light. My entire personhood, 11 years of service, the photograph in my breast pocket, the woman whose face I cannot remember, the 3 campaigns, the serial number, the careful notes, all of it collapses, from the colony's perspective, into a set of environmental parameters. This is either the most dehumanizing thing I have ever understood, or the most accurate description of the human body I have ever encountered. I am still deciding. The taste of green in the back of my throat has become so constant that I have stopped registering it as an intrusion. It is simply the taste of breathing now, the taste of air as it comes through me. When I try to remember what air tasted like before, I find I cannot reconstruct it precisely. Something neutral. Something without character. The green has more character than neutral. It has depth, layers, something vegetal underneath, something almost sweet on top, and underneath both of those, something mineral, something that speaks of deep ground, of rock and root, and the slow, patient chemistry of things that grow in darkness. I am tasting the warg. I am tasting what the galaxy smells like to an orc. This thought should horrify me. It does not quite reach horror. It reaches something closer to wonder, the particular wonder of a man who has spent his life noticing things, and is noticing, right at the end, something genuinely new. I have been thinking about Krellin's Pass. This is perhaps an odd thing to record at this stage, when the colony in my chest is doing what it is doing, and my oxygen is what it is, and my handwriting is deteriorating in ways I can feel but not fully control. But the mind goes where it goes, and mine has gone to Krellin's Pass, and I think there is a reason for it, and I want to record the reason before I lose the thread. Krellin's Pass was my first campaign. I was 19 years old and freshly processed through the Scholar, and assigned to the 81st. And terrified in the way that only a 19-year-old who has never seen real combat can be terrified, which is comprehensively, without the moderating influence of experience. The pass was a meat grinder. I will not pretend otherwise. 3 months of fighting over a stretch of rocky ground that had no strategic value I could ever identify, against an enemy whose motivations I could never fully understand, for objectives that kept changing as the command structure shifted and reorganized itself in response to losses at the top. Men died beside me every day for 3 months. I survived by keeping my head down and my equipment functioning and my notes current. But there was a moment, somewhere in the 2nd month, that I have never written down before because I did not know how to write it down in a way that a Departamento Munitorum log would accept. I was in a foxhole. It was very early morning. The fighting had paused, for reasons that were never explained to me. And in that pause, in the grey pre-dawn light of Krellin's atmosphere, I heard something. From somewhere in the enemy lines, across 200 meters of churned and body-strewn ground, there was a sound. Low, regular, rhythmic. It took me several minutes to identify it as singing. Not human singing, orc singing. Not melodic in any way I was trained to recognize, but rhythmic, purposeful. A sound made by creatures who were, in that moment, engaged in something that mattered to them, something they did together, something that organized them against the darkness. I recorded it at the time as Unusual vocalization from enemy posse. Teon. Possible ritual activity. Recommend intelligence assessment. The intelligence assessment never came. But I never forgot the sound. It is with me now, in the trench, in the dark, with the green in my lungs, and the colony doing its work. The Orks sing when they camp. They sing in the dark. They have something that functions as culture, as ritual, as the shared making of meaning against the void. I do not know what their songs are about. I do not know if they mourn or celebrate, or something entirely alien to those categories, but they sing. And the sound of it crossed 200 meters of dead ground on Krellin's Pass and reached a 19-year-old guardsman in a foxhole who was too frightened to sleep. And it reached him, and it meant something to him, even then, even when he was the enemy of the things singing it. I mention this because I think it is related to the wonder, the green in my throat, the colony in my chest, the orc that stood over me and chose to walk away. There is something in the orc that is older than the Imperium, something that predates the Emperor's great project, that will persist after it, that operates on timescales that make the 10,000 years of the Imperium look like an afternoon. The spores that are killing me were designed, if biology can be said to design anything, before humanity had achieved space travel. They will be germinating in human lungs, long after whatever I was fighting for has been forgotten. I find this perspective useful. I find it clarifying. In the context of the orc biology and its timescales, my 11 years of service and my 3 campaigns and my serial number and my disappearing face in a photograph are not a tragedy. They are a blink, a momentary condition of the universe, that the universe noticed no more than it notices any other brief and local event. I am a blink. The green is something much longer than a blink. When I am gone, the green will continue. There is a phrase from the Ministorum's liturgy that I memorized in basic training and have not thought of since. The Emperor endures. We were supposed to take comfort from this. The idea that something persists, that the great project continues beyond any individual life, that your death is small, but the thing you died for is large. I took comfort in it once, in the early years, when the faith was newer and the campaigns had not yet accumulated their particular weight. I do not take comfort in it now because I find at the end of things that the statement is both true and empty. Of course the Emperor endures. Of course something persists. The question is whether what persists is what you wanted to persist. Whether the continuity is the continuity you were serving, or some other continuity entirely, the continuity of the green, of the spore, of the colony that does not know your name, and does not care about your sacrifice, and will use your body for its own purposes, regardless of what you believed in when the body was still yours. The green endures too. My respiratory rate is beyond my ability to count accurately now. I know it is high because I can feel the effort of each breath, the work of it, the negotiation with the colony for the small volume of space required to exchange enough gas to keep my nervous system functional. I am at perhaps 60 to 70% of normal lung capacity. The remaining 30 to 40% is colony, is green, is the thing that is not me, occupying the space where me used to be. 60 to 70% of normal capacity is not enough for a person engaged in physical activity. It is barely enough for a person sitting still against a trench wall writing in a log that may or may not be legible. I am sitting still. I am writing. I am managing. I have been trying to compose in my here. D. The report I would write if I were going to file 1. The official Departamento Munitorum incident report for Guardsman Lucas Vaughn. Serial number on the inside of his collar. 3rd Company, 81st Armetian Infantry. Cause of casualty, Ork Spore infestation, pulmonary. Time of first symptom, 0731. Time of incapacitation, approximately 1438. Expected time of final incapacitation, sometime this evening, I estimate. Current status of affected equipment, las gun, functional, abandoned at position 7 of trench section 9. Rebreather, functional per its own readout, inadequate to prevent infestation. Field log, present, condition deteriorating. Photograph, present. Contents of photograph unknown. Sentimental value, difficult to assess. Practical value, none. I would mark myself under converted to enemy biological resource. I would note the dispersal risk. I would recommend that any personnel recovering this log maintain distance from the body and employ full biohazard protocols, which I recognize is information that will arrive too late for whoever is reading this in whatever proximity they are currently reading it. I would append a note. The filter at 63% was not sufficient. Recommend revised replacement threshold for Ork contested environments. Recommend research into enhanced seal integrity. Recommend that future briefing documents on Spore Choke progression include the information that the process takes approximately 12 hours from first symptom to final incapacitation, and that those 12 hours are not characterized by agony, but by something stranger, and in some ways harder to articulate, a gradual and pervasive transformation of the self from subject to object, from person to place, from soldier to soil. That is what I would file. The report would be received by a processing clerk who has never been to the front, and who would enter the relevant codes into the relevant system and mark the entry complete and move on to the next file. My 11 years would become a row in a database. My 3 campaigns would become a statistic in a performance assessment of the 81st Armetian Infantry. My lungs would become a garden. These things would happen simultaneously in different parts of the Imperium, with equal indifference to the fact that they were all, once, the same man. The light is going. I am fairly certain now that it is my eyes, and not the ambient light. There is a visual narrowing that is consistent with severe hypoxia, the peripheral vision withdrawing first, the field contracting, the world becoming a smaller and smaller circle. I can still see the page I am writing on, barely. I can still feel the stylus in my fingers, though I cannot be certain my fingers are responding to my commands the way I intend them to. The handwriting has deteriorated. If you are reading this and having difficulty with the script, I apologize. I am doing my best. The movements are profound now, both lungs completely occupied by sensation. Each breath is a negotiation with the colony, a request for space, a temporary displacement of the growing things to allow a diminishing volume of air to pass. The colony accommodates this with the indifference of biology. It does not intend to suffocate me, any more than a growing plant intends to split the rock it is growing through. It simply grows. The suffocation is a byproduct. My respiratory rate by feel is very fast now, faster than I can accurately count, the body's desperate attempt to extract adequate oxygen from lungs that are increasingly unavailable for that purpose. I am not afraid. I want to record this because it surprised me, and I think it is worth recording. I am not afraid. I thought I would be. I thought the approach of death, particularly this kind of death, would produce fear in quantity, the sharp electric fear I anticipated this morning. It has not. I am not certain why. Perhaps the hypoxia has impaired the neural pathways involved in fear response. Perhaps 11 years of living with the possibility of death has worn the fear smooth, made it something I have already processed so many times that the actual event is anticlimactic. Perhaps there is something in the colony, some chemical process, some biological kindness in the Ork Spore's interaction with human neurochemistry that produces calm in the final stages. A garden does not need its soil to be distressed. A garden needs its soil to be still. Perhaps the colony has arranged for stillness, or perhaps I am simply too tired. The green is in my throat now. I can taste it clearly. Not the faint metallic sweetness of the morning, but something full and present. Something that is me and not me. Something that is merged with the chemistry of my body so thoroughly that the distinction between host and colony has become academic. I am breathing green. I am tasting green. The thing inside me and the thing I am have reached some kind of mutual arrangement. Not cooperation, not consent. Something more fundamental than either of those. The arrangement between ground and seed. Between rain and root. Between the available and the thing that needs to use what is available. The photograph is still in my breast pocket. I cannot see it in the failing light, but I know it is there. I thought about taking it out and looking at it one final time, but I have decided against this. I cannot remember the face, and the photograph will not restore it. Let her stay a shape, a suggestion, a piece of paper that represents a connection I once had to a life that did not involve lascans and trench lines and alien biology. Let her remain as she has been for years, a tool I carried for psychology. Stability, the evidence that I was a person once who was connected to other persons. The evidence is still valid. I was that person. I am less certain what I am now. What I am now is this: a body in a trench on a world whose name I have forgotten, with a green colony in my chest and a stylus in my deteriorating hand, and a log that will be found by whoever finds it, read by whoever reads it, filed by whoever files it. What I am now is the final entry, the last timestamp. The closing notation on 11 years of careful, attentive clinical service. I am the end of the record. But the record, I realize now, is not the only thing being written here. The colony is writing too. It is writing in a language I cannot read, in a medium I cannot see, in my own tissue, with my own substance. It is composing the next chapter in a story that predates the Imperium and will outlast it. The story of the green, of the spore, and the growth, of the way that alien biology has learned to make use of the galaxy's available material. I am a chapter. I am a very small chapter, but I am in the story. In the most literal possible sense, I am becoming part of it. I have been thinking, in these last hours, about what kind of orcs will grow from me. I know this is not a productive line of thought. I know it changes nothing and resolves nothing and is perhaps evidence that the hypoxia has compromised my capacity for purely rational reflection. But I cannot stop thinking about it. The colony is made from my substance. The spores that will eventually disperse from this body will carry, presumably, some trace of the material they grew in, the particular chemistry of a human lung, the specific mineral content of a human body, fed for 30 years on Armetian rations and regimental supplements. Whether any of that material influences what grows from it, I do not know. The briefing documents are silent on this point. Perhaps it does not matter. Perhaps the orc biology is robust enough that the growing medium leaves no trace on the final product. Perhaps the spores are absolute, indifferent to the source, producing identical results regardless of what they grew in. But perhaps not. Perhaps some trace remains. Perhaps in the orcs that grow from this trench on this forgotten world, there is something, some microscopic marker, some chemical signature that carries the last remnant of Lucas Vaughn, Senior Guardsman, 81st Armetian Infantry. Perhaps I will kill Imperial soldiers for centuries after my death, and they will never know that what kills them carries, in the deepest structure of its cells, the ghost of a man who tried very hard to document his own destruction and almost succeeded. This thought does not comfort me, but it interests me, even now, even here. I am still interested. The instinct to notice, to observe, to find the thing worth recording persists past everything else, past the certainty, past the fear, past the oxygen. I am still here as long as I am still interested. And I am still interested. I am a soldier. That much persists. The habit of documentation has persisted past the point where I would have predicted it could persist. My notes are current through to the moment of writing. If you are reading this, you are probably a Medici officer or an intelligence analyst, or most likely, an orc. In which case these words mean nothing to you, which is its own kind of answer. If you are human, if you are Imperial, if you have found these notes on a body that no longer resembles the body of the man who wrote them, I want you to understand what you have found. You have found 11 years of service, 3 campaigns, a serial number, and a photograph. A rebreather that was functioning at 0400 and was not sufficient. You have found a man, well, who followed the protocols, who kept his head down, who believed that careful attention to the details of survival would be enough. You have found the documentation of what happens when the protocols are not sufficient and the enemy is not external, and the attention, however careful, however patient, however precise, cannot change the fundamental facts of biology. You have found the beginning of something, because the green inside me has not finished. When you find this body, the colony will be in its dispersal phase, and the spores it releases will be looking for a new home. And if you are standing close enough to this page to read it, then you may already have breathed them in. And if you have breathed them in, then somewhere in your chest, between one breath and the next, the first tiny tickle is beginning. The first faint suggestion of a taste that is metallic, and then sweet, and then something else entirely, something that has no prior reference, something that is the sensation of a world beginning to rearrange itself inside you. Check your rebreather. Check it now. If it shows green, know that green does not always mean what you need it to mean. Know that green on this world, in this air, means something else entirely. Know that the readout on your equipment is measuring the function of your equipment, not the condition of your lungs, and that these are two different measurements, and the gap between them is where the colony lives. I was a soldier. I survived 3 campaigns. I counted the days until I could go home. I believed that dying for the Emperor meant something, that my death would buy something, that the transaction was real, and that I was a willing and knowing participant in it. I believed this because it was the only way to be in the Guard and remain functional, remain purposeful, remain the kind of man who could hold a line and fire a lasgun and apply a field dressing to a wounded squad mate and keep going. The belief was not weakness. The belief was infrastructure. It held me up the way scaffolding holds up a building under construction, and for 11 years it was sufficient. It is not sufficient for this. No belief is sufficient for this. There is no theological framework, no ministorum liturgy, no regimental tradition that has a category for what is happening in my chest. There are briefing documents. There are clinical progressions. There are timestamps and symptom records, and the careful notation of a man who has tried to document the thing happening to him with as much precision and clarity as the thing allows. But there is no meaning I can extract from this that fits into the shape the Imperium prepared me to understand. My death will not hold a line. My death will not buy time. My death will be converted immediately and efficiently into more orcs. The enemy will use my sacrifice the way the Imperium always wanted me to use it, as fuel, as material, as the raw substance of continued conflict. The Orks are better at this than the Imperium is. I say this not as a criticism of the Emperor's great project, but as a simple observation, the last clinical observation of a man who spent his career observing. The Orks waste nothing. Every dead Ork seeds the ground with spores. Every dead Guardsman now seeds the ground with the colony. The Warg does not distinguish between its own dead and its enemy's dead. All dead are material. All material is opportunity. The Imperium taught me that my death meant something. The Orks have arranged things so that my death means something to them. This is the answer. This is what it means. It means the body is not yours. It never was. You borrowed it from the process that made you, and the process will take it back, and it will be used for purposes that are not your purposes and not the Emperor's purposes, because the process does not have purposes in the way that people have purposes. The process has only direction. Grow. Use what is available. Transform the available material into more life, more complexity, more green. This is the answer to the question I asked at the beginning of this document, and it is not an answer I can do anything useful with, but it is true, and I was trained to record true things, and I am recording it. The green is everything now. The green is my breathing and my thinking and the thing my hands are doing and the last of the light available to my failing eyes. The green is the weight of both lungs, fully claimed, and the rhythm that is not my rhythm and the taste that has replaced all other tastes. The green is the colony completing its work with the thoroughness of something that has done this before, that has always done this, that will be doing this long after the 81st Armenian Infantry has been dissolved into the statistical history of the Guard and the world whose name I cannot remember, has been logged in some archive and forgotten. I was a soldier. I had a name. I had a number. I had a photograph and 3 campaigns, and a belief and a stylus, and for a little while, enough oxygen to use them all. I am at the end of my oxygen now. I am at the end of my light. I am at the end of the record, which is to say, I am at the beginning of what comes after the record. The part that the record cannot contain. The part that is not words on a page, but roots in tissue and spores in air and the slow, patient, indifferent business of growth. The Emperor will never know my name. The orcs that grow from my body will not know my name either. The colony does not know my name. The world does not know my name. The galaxy, vast and ancient, and utterly disinterested in the transactions of men and orcs and Imperiums, does not know my name. But I know it. Lucas Vaughn, Senior Guardsman, 11 years, 3 campaigns. I was here. I noticed things. I wrote them down. I breathed in the enemy, and I documented what it felt like, and I did not stop documenting until I could not continue, and that, in the end, is the only monument I have, and the only one I need. The notes are the monument. The record is the monument. You are reading the monument. Some drownings never end, and some drownings, when they are over, become gardens. What grows in a garden is not the gardener's choice. What grows here, in the warm dark of these occupied lungs, on this forgotten world, in the aftermath of this small and unrecorded life, will not be mine. It will be green, and vast, and patient, and utterly indifferent to the name of the man whose last breath fed it, whose last warmth sustained it, whose careful and persistent and finally extinguished attention made room for it in the only way that was left. The Emperor protects. The green grows anyway, and somewhere in its growth, if you look very closely, if you have the instruments and the patience and the willingness to find it, there may be a trace, a chemical signature, a microscopic remnant of the man who noticed everything right up until there was nothing left to notice. I like to think it is there. I like to think that even the green could not entirely erase the observer, that somewhere in the colony, in the deepest structure of what it is becoming, there is a record that even the warg cannot file away. My name is Lucas Vaughn. I was here.